During the game, I thought it would be fun to discuss a little bit of drama and maybe pose a question to you. But did you hear earlier this morning, Shannon Sharpe on his show talked about Brock Purdy and he called Brock Purdy a system quarterback and said that he was not elite. I feel like Brock Purdy's been in the MVP conversation lately. There's been a lot of discussions going on. So, how do you feel about those comments just to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation about system quarterbacks has become diluted. For me, when you hear about a system quarterback, many people now assume that to be a negative. But if you look at it, there are certain quarterbacks that change the game ultimately. And then there are other quarterbacks that you are seen as franchise quarterbacks that do the right things and that elevates the team. Brock Purdy falls in this category. He consistently is able to do the right things for his team, and that's a reason why his team is successful. Now, the reason people like to try and throw, harp on Brock Purdy this season is because of the reasons that they thought they could harp on him last season. It's the head coach, obviously the offensive system producing well for quarterbacks, and also the elite amount of skill position players around Brock Purdy. However, just because those factors are there doesn't mean that you can discredit what Brock Purdy's doing, because there is a difference from 2022 to 2023. Brock Purdy right now is playing with supreme confidence, but he's mastered the timing with receivers. He's throwing with anticipation, and it's the little small improvements that have accelerated him from maybe, the 20th best quarterback in 2022 to maybe the 10th best quarterback or so in 2021. And 23. And if you look statistically, it's hard to say that he's not a top three quarterback right now, right? Overall, it's just you're wanting to wait and see over a bigger scope of games like you do with other quarterbacks. But to me, I think the system quarterback moniker is now becoming a little more diluted. I think you can, if you want, you could name several quarterbacks that are in that franchise echelon as system quarterbacks, because they don't necessarily, they do what's asked of them and they do it at a high level. I don't think that should be considered a bad thing. So if you want to consider Brock Purdy a system quarterback, by all means you can, but that shouldn't be considered a bad thing if he's consistently executing and operating with the way that the 49ers want him to do so.
I like that response. Like, I think it's been kind of interesting hearing people discuss it and maybe ask more, um, what is your definition of a system quarterback? Because if it's that tier two level quarterback that, Kirk Cousins, maybe Dak Prescott, um, Geno Smith right now would probably be in there. And those are all people that are quarterbacks, maybe not Geno Smith yet, that franchises or organizations are considering franchise guys right now. Now, obviously, sustained success is important to be in there, but I also think that Brock Purdy is showing a little bit of like elite escapability at least, and elite poise and processing of the offense. I mean, he's only 23 years old. He in a press conference earlier today said that he is sure that he's not reached his peak yet and that he has a lot more growth to do. And I just think that I think he has potential to be elite. I think you can maybe get those between the eyes things down, but he does have some physical attributes that potentially were overlooked or not they were overlooked in the draft. And even last year, he's this year compared to last year, this year he's throwing outside the numbers more. All his touchdowns against Dallas were outside the box. You consistently see him escaping pressure, from running out of the pocket, throwing on the run. Um, so I think he has potential to be elite. Now, arm strength might be not be at the top of the list, but I do think he can elevate himself above what Shannon Sharpe meant when he said system quarterback. Because when he went into explaining that, he definitely meant it as a diss. It kind of reminds me earlier this week, Dan Orlovsky said that Mac Jones could be doing the same thing that Brock Purdy is currently doing. And I think that conversation would have been interesting last year. I think I also would have agreed with Dan Orlovsky last year. But this year, Brock Purdy really has stepped up his game. And that's pretty impressive since he had the entire offseason off or offseason rehabbing. So I do assume that he'll only get better. And at least while he's on his rookie deal with this amount of weapons and this coach and everything, which no one says that about Jalen Hurts, even, and I'm not comparing them, but Patrick Mahomes has an elite offensive play caller. And a different question that I had for you within that Shannon Sharpe segment, well, actually, first, do you think that Mac Jones would be running this offense as efficiently as Brock Purdy is right now? Before I get to the next question.
Now that's a good question. That's hard. To me, I would not say so just because um I mean, we've seen elevations from Brock Purdy in his play, and I do believe right now Brock Purdy's playing better. However, I think the debate that Orlovsky was trying to spark there was how Mac Jones, if he was placed in a better system with better weapons around him, would play better. Because in New England right now, that system is not very good for Mac Jones in terms of he hasn't ever had great offensive weapons. I mean, it's not a really a situation where he's there to win. It's not a winning
Kendrick
situation for
Bourne.
Mac Jones.
Kendrick Bourne.
Kendrick Bourne special. But unfortunately, if you have Kendrick Bourne as your top receiver, especially with the way that today's NFL is, that's just not going to cut it. And so I think Mac Jones would improve if he was placed with the 49ers. And I think that, he would be solid. I think some of his traits are, underrated in that people just point to the way that Mac Jones has physical limitations and things like that. I do think, though, Brock Purdy at the moment has proven that he can be better. Unfortunately, I mean, we're not going to see the answer to that because we won't see Mac Jones in a 49ers uniform in the near future. But overall, I mean, I don't think that there's a basis to say those type of statements comparing one to another. You could obviously say Mac Jones would play better if he was for the San Francisco 49ers. He could look like a serviceable NFL quarterback and things like that. But I don't know if there's a basis to hearing that kind of thing just to prove a point that one system is not as good as the other.
I agree. I also think maybe when comparing them, temperament would be important to consider. Brock Purdy seems able to speak the same language as Kyle Shanahan and maybe not take offense to any sort of criticism or direction. And we've seen, obviously, he's been in a frustrating situation, but Mac Jones seems a little bit. I kind of feel like he's like a dirty player. He makes bad plays. He's always throwing fits. I just feel like that type of attitude wouldn't excel here. And I think Brock Purdy, but Brock Purdy's mind really meshes with Kyle Shanahan. His determination when you hear him in that press conference talk about his ultimate goal, winning multiple Super Bowls, proving that he's more than all these media says, even though he in the same thing was like, oh, I don't hear it, but then also was like, I'm so much more than everything that these people are assuming. So it's like, okay,
Right.
well, I think you heard it then because you're addressing it, but I got it. Um, Going back to Shannon Sharpe's comments, so we both kind of agree he is running the system, whether or not that really, and he's optimizing the system. He's running it really efficiently. He might not have the most elite traits, which I was agreeing with Shannon Sharpe, who was talking about elite traits and mentioning Patrick Mahomes, and I was listening along, like, okay, I can get behind this, I can get behind this. And then after Patrick Mahomes, using him as an example, comparing his skill set to Purdy's. Then Shannon Sharpe said, well, and Tua is obviously much better and running his system much better. And that kind of surprised me because the criticisms that people are using against Brock Purdy, having a, genius play caller, having all these weapons, maybe relying on a system that is utilizing their specific skill sets, or Brock Purdy's specific skill sets, that also applies to Tua. Mike McDaniel is probably in the running for, or he is in the running for Coach of the Year right now. He uh, came up with that play call that all the different offensive coordinators around the league stole within like 2 weeks. So he's very clearly doing a really good job over there, but
Right.
that's with the help of Mike McDaniel. So do you think if you were going to compare Tua and Brock Purdy, who do you think maybe is optimizing their offense the best? And do you think that there's a big discrepancy in talent between the two? I know obviously they were drafted completely differently, but now that we've seen Tua in the league a little while and we've seen what Purdy's been able to accomplish, albeit in a short time.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this goes back to the system quarterback debate and things like that. And I wanted to say this one thing. I think Jimmy Garoppolo, when you consider Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy, a lot of people dub Jimmy Garoppolo as a system quarterback. And if you're dubbing Brock Purdy as a system quarterback, I mean, many people, the issue is they'll combine them all together and say they're the same talent. you could say both are quote unquote system quarterbacks, but they operate the system in many different ways. Garoppolo, the issue was he wouldn't take those, the corner out routes. He wouldn't take those second, third level throws that are the first reads in the offense. Instead, would go ahead and go for the higher probability throw, which would result in less yards and obviously means you need more plays to score a touchdown. Purdy takes the first read, in the system or in the progression of the play. And so that's the difference. He's operating the system like Garoppolo. It's just he's operating it more effectively, and that's what's elevating him as a quarterback. Because in a way, everybody can be a system quarterback, but it's how efficient can you truly be and things like that. And that's where Brock Purdy, I think, is at a different level. If you talk about the Tua Tagovailoa, I think Tagovailoa is another guy who has seen an increase in play this year. You talk about the early portion of the year. I thought he had probably the best game of his career against the Los Angeles Chargers in Week 1, but I think they're in a similar range. I don't know if you can really say one, takes you put the moniker on one, and you don't put it on the other, and I think they're in a similar range in that they're both in a very similar system, and they're just both utilized in different ways because Miami's weapons operate under pure speed. You've got some really, really strong speed threats. San Francisco's operate well in space. It's a similar space game, just a different utilization of weapons. And so to me, I think you can put them together in a similar, in a similar range of where they are as quarterbacks, given the acceleration that they've had in their progressions this season. I mean, you can make arguments for both. Statistically, Purdy right now looks better. If you want to go over a longer body of work, I mean, Tua Tagovailoa has a bigger body of work. You can make different arguments for both, but I don't know if there's a distinct argument where you can just separate them like Shannon Sharpe did earlier this morning. I think that that's where there are issues with just dubbing people system quarterbacks and going on about your business like that.
I completely agree. I was like I said, I was just a little bit shocked. I'm like, okay, if you want to say there's differences between Purdy and Mahomes, I'm on your level. But when saying that there was this huge discrepancy between Tua and Purdy, I was just like, I don't know. I'm not big on ranking guys this early in their career, but I just think if potentially Purdy wasn't a seventh round quarterback, people would be giving him a little bit more credit. I think if maybe a Trevor Lawrence was doing what Purdy was doing on this team with this coordinator or with this play caller with these weapons, I don't think Shannon Sharpe would be saying that Tua is miles better than him.